The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission was an air combat battle in World War II, a strategic bombing attack flown by B-17 flying fortresses of the U.S. Army Air Forces on August 17, 1943. It was conceived as an ambitious plan to cripple the German aircraft industry. The mission was also known as the Double Strike Mission, because it entailed two large forces of bombers attacking separate targets in order to disperse fighter reaction by the Luftwaffe, and was the first shuttle mission, in which all or part of a mission landed at a different field and later bombed another target returning to its base. After being postponed several times by unfavorable weather, the operation, known within the 8th Air Force's Mission No. 84, was flown on the anniversary of the first daylight raid by the 8th Air Force. Mission No. 84 was a strike by 376 bombers of 16 bomb groups against German heavy industry well beyond the range of escorting fighters. The mission inflicted heavy damage on the Regensburg target, but at catastrophic loss to the force, with 60 bombers lost and many more damaged beyond economical repair. As a result, the 8th Air Force was unable to follow up immediately with a second attack that might have seriously crippled German industry. When Schweinfurt was finally attacked again 2 months later, the lack of long-range fighter escort had still not been addressed and losses were even higher. As a consequence, deep penetration strategic bombing was curtailed for 5 months. The mission plan, because of diversions of groups to the invasion of North Africa, the bomber force in England had been limited in size to 4 groups of B-17s and 2 of B-24s until May 1943. At that time, and in conjunction with the point-blank directive to destroy the Luftwaffe in preparation for Operation Overlord, the B-17 force had expanded fourfold and was organized into the 1st and 4th Bombardment Wings. The 1st Bombardment Wing, which included all of the original B-17 groups, was based in the English Midlands, while the 4th Bombardment Wing stations were located in East Anglia. Point-blank operations in April and July 1943 had concentrated solely on the production of the FW-190 at factories in Bremen, Kassel, and Oschersleben, and although serious losses to the bomber forces had occurred, the attacks had been successful enough to warrant attacking those manufacturing Messerschmitt Bf-109s. The production of Bf-109s was located in Regensburg and in Wiener Neustadt, Austria. To attack these insufficient force, Operation Jugular was conceived, in which the fighter production plants in Wiener Neustadt were targeted for attack by B-24 Liberators of the 9th Air Force based in Libya, and Regensburg by B-17s of the 8th Air Force. The original mission date of August 7 could not be met because of bad weather, and the B-24s flew Operation Jugular on August 13 without participation by the 8th Air Force, which was still hampered by unacceptable weather conditions. LeMay's force was expected to take the brunt of the German counter-offensive, allowing the Schweinfurt Armada to proceed to the target with only light resistance. With LeMay escaping over the Alps, the Schweinfurt force would be left to face the full fury of the Luftwaffe on its return to England. The plan was brutally simple. LeMay would fight his way in and Williams would fight his way out. Donald L. Miller, Masters of the Air, to successfully complete its portion of the attack. The 8th Air Force decided to attack a target in central Germany as well as Regensburg to divide and confuse German air defenses. The 4th Bombardment Wing, using B-17s equipped with Tokyo tanks for longer range, would attack the Messerschmitt Bf-109 plants in Regensburg and then fly on to bases in Bonn, Burtos and Teligma. The 1st Bombardment Wing, following it, would turn northeast and bomb the ball-bearing factories of Schweinfurt and by doing so catch German fighter aircraft on the ground rearming and refueling. Because of limited range thanks to not employing drop tanks, Escorting P-47 Thunderbolt fighters would be able to protect the bombers only as far as Eupen, Belgium, which was roughly an hour's flying time from both of the targets. Two supporting attacks were also made a part of the overall mission plan. The first, a diversionary attack, involved the bombing of 3 locations along the French and Dutch coast. The German airfields at Briey-Sudden-Mark by American B-26 Marauder and Royal Air Force Mitchell medium bombers, and the marshalling yards at Dunkirk by other Mitchells, all timed to coincide with the Regensburg strike. The second was a series of attacks on Luftwaffe fighter fields at Puy, Lille-Vendeville, and Woensdrecht by Hawker Typhoons of the RAF, simultaneous with the diversionary attack, and Puy by 2 groups of B-26s in the afternoon as the Schweinfurt force was returning. Weather delays. 8th Air Force bomber operations were calculated with 1 to 2 hours of climb and assembly into formations factored into mission lengths. In addition, the mission length for the Regensburg force was anticipated to be of 11 hours duration, so that commanders had only a 90-minute window in which to launch the mission and still allow the 4th Bombardment Wing B-17s to reach North Africa in daylight. Mission 84 planning indicated a takeoff window from dawn to approximately 800 without cancelling the mission. At dawn of August 17, after airmen had gone to their airplanes, England was covered in fog. The mission takeoff was delayed until 800, when the fog had cleared sufficiently over East Anglia to allow the 4th Bombardment Wing to take off using instruments, a technique they had practiced. Although attacking both targets simultaneously was deemed critical to success of the mission without prohibitive loss, the Regensburg force was ordered to take off, even though the 1st Bombardment Wing remained grounded at its bases by the adverse weather. By the time the fog had sufficiently cleared over the Midlands, the Regensburg force had already reached the coast of the Netherlands, which indicated that reacting German fighters would have sufficient time to land, replenish, and attack the 2nd Task Force. Consequently, the launch of the Schweinfurt force was further delayed to allow U.S. escort fighters sufficient time to return to base to rearm for a second escort mission. In all, the 1st Wing was delayed more than 3 hours behind the 4th Wing. Regensburg Strike Force. The Regensburg Task Force was led by the 4th Bombardment Wing commander, Colonel Curtis E. LeMay. It consisted of 7 B-17 groups totaling 146 aircraft, each group but one flying a 21-aircraft combat box tactical formation. The groups were organized into 3 larger formations termed Provisional Combat Wings. 3 groups in a V formation wing box leading the procession, followed in trail by 2 wing boxes of 2 groups each in echelon formation, with 1 group leading and the second trailing at lower altitude. Source: Decision over Schweinfurt. Mighty 8th War Diary. Approximately 15 minutes after it crossed the coast at 1000, the Regensburg force encountered the first German fighter interception, which continued with growing intensity nearly all the way to the target area. Several factors weighed against the Regensburg force in this air battle. The arrangement of 2 groups instead of 3 in the 2 following provisional wings meant a third fewer guns available to each for their mutual defense and made them more likely targets. The overall length of the task force was too great for effective fighter support. The last wing formation of bombers was 15 miles behind the first and nearly out of visual range. Of the 2 groups of P-47s tasked to escort the force to the German border, only one arrived at the rendezvous point on time, covering only the lead wing, and the second arrived 15 minutes late. Finally, both P-47 groups were forced to turn back to base after only 15 minutes of escort duty, without engaging any German interceptors. The last provisional wing in the task force was left without any fighter protection at all. After 90 minutes of combat, the German fighter force broke off the engagement, low on fuel and ammunition. By then at least 15 bombers had been shot down or fatally damaged, 13 from the trailing formation. However, anti-aircraft fire was light over Regensburg and visibility clear, and of the remaining 131 bombers, 126 dropped 298.75 tons of bombs on the fighter aircraft factories with a high degree of accuracy at 11:43 British time. The Regensburg force then turned south to cross the Alps, confronted by only a few twin-engined fighters soon forced to disengage by lack of range. The German force had not been prepared for this contingency, but they were also in the process of rearming to meet the Schweinfurt force, then forming over East Anglia. Even so, 2 damaged B-17s turned away from the Regensburg task force and landed in neutral Switzerland, where their crews were interned and the bombers confiscated. Another crash landed in Italy and 5 more were forced down by lack of fuel into the Mediterranean Sea. In all, 24 bombers were lost and more than 60 of the 122 survivors landing in Tunisia had suffered battle damage. Schweinfurt Strike Force. The 1st Bombardment Wing, commanded by Brigadier General Robert B. Williams, was made up of 9 B-17 groups. Previously, because of this large number of groups, provisional combat bomb wings had been formed in April to control the groups tactically during large missions. To achieve a maximum effort against Schweinfurt, the 1st Bomb Wing, with sufficient aircraft and crews to employ 4 wing-sized boxes, formed provisional groups as well as wings, accomplished by 8 groups providing a squadron or spare aircraft to form the composite groups needed to form a 4th combat wing. The Schweinfurt force in all had 230 bombers comprising 12 groups divided into 2 task forces, each with 2 wings. Each wing composed of a 3-group formation, and was more than 20 miles in length. Williams personally led the mission, flying as co-pilot in an aircraft of the lead formation, as wingman to the commander of the 91st Bomb Group. Source: Decision over Schweinfurt. The Schweinfurt task forces followed the same route as the Regensburg force. Because of the delayed start of the mission, 8 squadrons of RAF Spitfire fighters from 11 Group and 83 Group had been added to escort the Schweinfurt force as far as Antwerp, where P-47s would take over and escort it to Eupen. The field order for the mission specified that the B-17s would fly at altitudes between 23,000 and 26,500 feet. But approaching the coast of the Netherlands at 13:30, it was confronted with developing cloud masses not present earlier in the day. The commander of the 1st Task Force estimated that the bombers would not be able to climb over the clouds and elected to fly under them at 17,000 feet, increasing the vulnerability of the bombers to fighter attacks. The first German attacks began almost immediately and employed different tactics from the morning mission. The lead wing was attacked continuously in head-on attacks by both Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Fw-190 fighters, and although the RAF escorts claimed 8 victories, they were forced to return to base early in the engagement. The 2 groups of P-47s arrived 5 and 8 minutes late, and despite some individual combats, they too were forced to break off virtually as soon as they arrived. Inside German airspace, the Bf-109 G6 fighters of 5 Staffel JG-11, which had pioneered the fitment of the Werfer Granit 21 unguided air-to-air rocket weapon system to the Luftwaffe's single-engined A-fighter force the previous day, as well as the similarly armed rocket-launching twin-engined Bf-110 Zerstorer heavy fighters, including night fighters. joined the battle as more than 300 fighters from 24 bases opposed the raid. At 14:36 the force diverged from the morning's route at Worms, Germany, alerting the German defenders that the target was Schweinfurt. Losses among the 57 B-17s of the lead wing were so severe that many among its airmen considered the possibility that the wing might be annihilated before reaching the target. However, 15 miles from Schweinfurt, the opposing fighters, after shooting down 22 bombers, disengaged and landed to refuel and rearm in order to attack the force on its way out. 5 miles from Schweinfurt, German anti-aircraft guns began firing an effective flak barrage into the path of the bomber force. At 14:57, approximately 40 B-17s remained of the lead wing when it dropped its bombs on the target area containing 5 factories and 30,000 workers, followed over a 24-minute span by the remainder of the force. Each wing found increasingly heavy smoke from preceding bomb explosions a hindrance to accuracy. 183 bombers dropped 424.3 tons of bombs, including 125 tons of incendiary bombs. 3 B-17s were shot down by flak over Schweinfurt. 15 minutes after leaving the target, each task force circled over the town of Meiningen to reassemble its formations, then continued west toward Brussels. At approximately 15:30, German fighters renewed their attacks, concentrating now on damaged bombers. Between 1620 and 1700, a covering force of 93 P-47s and 95 Spitfires arrived to provide withdrawal support, claiming 21 fighters shot down. But 8 more bombers were lost before the force reached the North Sea, where 3 more crash-landed. The Schweinfurt force lost a total of 36 bombers. Source: Decision over Schweinfurt. Mighty 8th War Diary. Results and losses. 55 bombers with 552 crewmen were listed as missing as a result of the August 17 double-target mission. Approximately half of those became prisoners of war, and 20 were interned. 60 aircraft were lost over German-controlled territory, in Switzerland, or ditched at sea, with 5 crews rescued. 7 aircrew were killed aboard bombers safely returning to base, and 21 wounded. The 60 aircraft lost on a single mission more than doubled the highest previous loss at that time. There were also 55 to 95 additional aircraft badly damaged. Of those damaged, many were stranded in and never repaired. 3 P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group and 2 RAF Spitfires were shot down attempting to protect the Schweinfurt force. Spitfire pilots claimed 13 German fighters shot down and P-47 pilots claimed 19. Gunners on the bombers claimed 288 fighters shot down, but Luftwaffe records showed only 25 to 27 were lost. In Regensburg, all 6 main workshops of the Messerschmitt factory were destroyed or severely damaged, as were many supporting structures including the final assembly shop. In Schweinfurt the destruction was less severe but still extensive. The 2 largest factories, Kugelfischer & Company and Vereinigte Kugellagerfabrik, suffered 80 direct hits. 35,000 square meters of buildings in the 5 factories were destroyed, and more than 100,000 square meters suffered fire damage. All the factories except Kugelfischer had extensive fire damage to machinery when incendiaries ignited the machine oil used in the manufacturing process. Albert Speer reported an immediate 34% loss of production. But both the production shortfall and the actual loss of bearings were made up for by extensive surpluses found throughout Germany in the aftermath of the raid. The industry's infrastructure, while vulnerable to a sustained campaign, was not vulnerable to destruction by a single raid. Speer indicated that the 2 major flaws made by the USAAF in the August strike were first in dividing the force instead of all striking the ball-bearing plants, and second, failing to follow up the first strike with repeated attacks. 203 civilians were also killed in the strike. The Schweinfurt mission in particular foretold the failure of deep penetration raids of Germany without adequate long-range escort. The first bomb wing was over German-occupied territory for 3 hours and 30 minutes, of which 2 hours and 10 minutes, including all of the time spent over Germany itself, saw no fighter support whatsoever. When the second attack on Schweinfurt came on October 14, the loss of more than 20% of the attacking force resulted in the suspension of deep raids for 5 months. This mission was enshrined in fiction as the Hamburgen Raid, in Ben Lay and Cy Bartlett's novel, 12 O'Clock High. It provides a reasonably accurate view of the thinking behind the planner's intention and the decisions that led to the abandonment of the goal of launching a double strike in such a way that the second strike would meet no aerial opposition, and of the action in the air itself. The Schweinfurt portion of the mission also formed the framework for the novel The War Lover, by John Hersey. In the early 1990s, the raid was depicted for the first time in a video game as a playable mission in Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe.